Welcome back to FP Executive. I'm here with Chris Pratt, Strategic Initiatives at IBM. Thank you again, Chris, for joining us.
Thank you, John.
We're mentioning virtualization, which you succinctly put forward as a way of sharing computers within a business. Now, I think many large businesses, like banks, for example, have certainly moved into that direction. But for medium-sized businesses, this is also an opportunity for them to also, I think, generate some efficiencies and improve upon not just the bottom line, but also saving energy. How does someone go about sitting there and thinking, okay, look, I need to get a new computer system, a new IT system. How are we going to build one for the future? What's the first step in that process?
Well, you know what, let's be honest and say the absolute first step is to make sure the application you choose is what you need for your business. So that still remains the king of the decision cycle.
Right.
Having said that, there are some underlying decisions that can factor in that are really important. Mm-hmm. So does this application demand its own dedicated infrastructure? Okay. Right? Does it require its own physical servers, etc.? Mm-hmm. Or can it be shared with the existing servers? Mm-hmm. If that is the case, maybe it's a better alternative to one that can't. So once you've made that decision, the next thing is, am I able to put together an infrastructure that better utilizes what I have? Because every time a new application comes along, if you think about it, it's not just production, it's development, it's test, it's quality assurance, right? So maybe your production environment isn't virtualized to start with, but maybe your development, your test, and your quality assurance, and all those other things. Because if you require a single server to run an application, chances are there's 2 or 3 in support of it, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. Interesting. So, in terms of virtualization, what sort of, I mean, some people are concerned if you start reducing the number of servers you have, it might reduce your ability to expand in the future, for example, or if you want to add additional applications. I'm curious, how easy is it today to simply, with virtualization, continue to expand and build on as you need to grow? If you pick a system today, using virtualization, you have a smaller system, are you going to be able to build out in the future and expand as your business grows?
Well, I think that would be almost the opposite of the way I would position virtualization. Okay. Because if you have a requirement that's physical, right, then even if you have the hardware available, you still have to power it on and connect it and plug it in. Right. In a virtual environment, you simply fire off a virtual server. You can put in a whole new infrastructure in seconds. Because the thing about virtualization is it's an abstraction. It cuts the bond between the physical layer and the logical layer. And I don't want to get too carried away here, but imagine if you weren't tied to a given place that did a piece of workload. It's like elevators, right? Okay. When you arrive at the building, there are 3 elevators. You take the first one that comes along, and that speeds up the process. It makes sure the elevators are better used. Whereas in a non-virtual environment, you would have a dedicated elevator dedicated to you that may be at the other side of the building, and when you call it, or it may be out of service. So as soon as you start sharing, it opens up all those possibilities. And in terms of expansion, it's tremendous, because what you'll find is your requirement for expansion is often reduced. Why? Because not all applications peak at the same time, right? Okay. Your ordering cycle is different to your billing cycle. Your end of year happens once a year, right? So you don't have to buy for all those peaks. So those are all the business benefits. And energy saving is also almost an afterthought around virtualization, right?
Well, this is a perspective on virtualization I hadn't really thought about. You're talking about it really builds in an agility for a business that perhaps wasn't there in the past.
I would say that's the most primary benefit of it all.
Primary benefit.
Absolutely, because as soon as you, for example, there are lots of analogies. I mean, it's too easy to. It's like a vehicle, right? When you arrive at an airport and rent a vehicle, because the interfaces are standard, you can get into any vehicle they provide you with, and you're off and away, right? If you were a computer application that required a very specific vehicle, there has to be a layer of cost to provide that given thing. And if you think about it, with virtualization, it allows you to have a direct relationship between the quality or the delivery of service and the price. The more a person is prepared to pay, the better the service.
You mentioned earlier that energy is very abundant in North America. Have you seen changes in the way companies are looking at how they use energy? Do you think this concern about energy is here to stay, or do you think it's a fad?
Wow, now I get myself... Absolutely. You know, I firmly believe that irrespective of what side of the argument you want to get on, just look out the window, look at the people, look at what we use in day-to-day life. So even if there is an absolute requirement to reduce our consumption. Right. And it is very easy to reduce our consumption. So whether you reduce your consumption because you want to be green or whether you reduce it just to save money, I believe you have to do it. Now, the second part of the question, is it here to stay? I guess that's to me, that's absolutely simple. As the population increases, the Earth's not getting any bigger last time I looked, right? So as we continue to use more and more and more resources, of course, right? Just think, I mean, there's so many thoughts that come to my mind, right? I mean, when I grew up, we had books, right? I wouldn't say, other than a few battery-operated toys, I didn't consume a lot of energy as a kid. Well, if I look at my own kids at university, and I think of how many devices they have that consume energy, those factor into it. So there are very good reasons, whether it's just the green approach or purely saving money.
Have you seen any changes in companies where they are actually putting people in charge of strategic energy management or anything like that? Have you seen that sort of trend emerging?
For sure. I have a group of business cards for chief sustainability officers. Okay. And now there are definitely organizations who've realized for their own sustainability versions, our own IBM has been involved in our own energy conservation for years and years and years. There are definitely senior executive positions that are being put in place. Now, yes, you could be cynical and say that's because it's good advertising, but at the end of the day, as energy costs continue to rise, one thing the green approach has brought us is it's allowed people to focus on that as being another area available for improvement.
Obviously, the careers in that sort of area are growing, and from what you said, it seems as though the silos that they once might have been working in are falling down now, and they're starting to be integrated.
Oh, we've got a long way to go. But you know what? Okay. With an organization, when we can go in and say, look, you can reduce your energy consumption by 10, 20, 30% in just using Canadian winters to cool your computers, for example. In the past, the IT guy may have said, well, I don't really care because that's not my budget. And the facilities guy went, well, I don't really care because I don't have money to spend to solve that. In the more progressive organizations, that Chief Sustainability Officer, they break that deadlock. The other thing we're seeing that's important to me is a project typically obviously has some payback. Maybe it's 12 or 18 months. Sometimes the CSO is able to say, look, because it's a very good environmentally sound project, we'll allow it 24 months to pay back. So that's one area. Everything has to stand on its own, but certain organizations are actually allowing a little bit longer for green projects to pay back.
Interesting. Chris Pratt, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for your time.